Welcome to the House of Imagination. Don't forget to subscribe and comment your thoughts about the story. Let's begin. John Smith, 35, had always been the picture of success in others' eyes. A law school graduate, partner at a respected firm in Boston, married to Sarah, his college sweetheart. From the outside, his life seemed perfect, but John carried a weight that few knew about. 6 months ago, his parents, Robert and Mary, had died in a tragic car accident. The grief was still an open wound, hidden beneath his well-pressed suit and the smile he practiced for clients. On this Monday morning, John gazed at the city through the window of his 20th floor office. Boston's overcast sky seemed to reflect his state of mind. He held a cup of cold coffee, forgotten between his fingers as his mind wandered to childhood memories. A knock on the door brought him back to reality. It was Jessica, his secretary. "Mr. Smith, your wife is on line 1. She says it's urgent." John thanked her with a nod and picked up the phone. Sarah's voice sounded tense on the other end. "John, the realtor called. He has 3 interested buyers for your parents' house. We need to decide if we're really going to sell." The house, the big house in Cape Cod where John spent every summer of his childhood. The place where his parents had planned to retire, a dream so abruptly interrupted. I don't know, Sarah. Part of me wants to keep the house, but... John, we've talked about this. Keeping the empty house will only bring more pain. Maybe it's time to let go. John knew she was right. Keeping the house meant holding on to an expectation that would never be fulfilled. His parents weren't coming back. "You're right," he finally said, feeling a lump in his throat. "Tell the realtor he can schedule the viewings. I'll go there this weekend to say goodbye." As he hung up the phone, John felt as if he were closing a chapter of his life. Little did he know that in trying to put his past to rest, he was about to open a door to long-buried secrets. Looking out the window again, John caught his reflection in the glass. For a moment, he thought he saw his father's silhouette beside him. He blinked, and the image was gone. It was time to face the past and move on. Or at least, that's what he thought he would do. The drive to Cape Cod felt longer than John remembered. Each mile seemed to peel away layers of the present, revealing memories he'd tried to suppress. As he crossed the Sagamore Bridge, the weight of his task settled heavily on his shoulders. 6 months earlier, on a night much like this one, John had received the call that changed everything. He could still hear the police officer's voice, steady but somber. "Mr. Smith, I'm sorry to inform you there's been an accident." His parents, Robert and Mary Smith, had been driving back from a charity event in Boston. A drunk driver had swerved into their lane on Route 6. They never stood a chance. John gripped the steering wheel tighter, willing the memory away. He'd been so busy with work, he'd barely allowed himself time to grieve. Now, as he approached the familiar turns leading to his childhood summer home, the reality of his loss hit him anew. The house stood silent, a looming Victorian against the darkening sky. John sat in the car for a long moment, gathering courage. Finally, he stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath his feet. A sound that once meant summer adventures was now a reminder of all he'd lost. Inside, sheets draped the furniture like ghosts. John moved through the rooms, each step stirring dust and memories. His mother's favorite reading chair by the bay window, his father's prized collection of nautical maps on the study wall. Everything was exactly as they'd left it that fateful night. In the kitchen, John found a note stuck to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a lighthouse. His mother's handwriting, "Don't forget to pick up lobster for Sunday dinner," a dinner that never happened. John's vision blurred with tears he'd held back for too long. As the evening wore on, John found himself on the back porch, staring out at the ocean. The decision to sell hadn't come easily. This house held the essence of his family: laughter-filled summer barbecues, lazy afternoons sailing, heated Monopoly games on rainy days. But it also now held an unbearable emptiness. His cell phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "How are you holding up? Remember, selling doesn't mean forgetting." John sighed. She was right, of course. Keeping the house wouldn't bring his parents back, and the upkeep of a second home, especially one filled with such powerful memories, seemed an unnecessary burden. Tomorrow, he'd start the process of sorting through his parents' belongings. What to keep, what to donate, what to throw away. Each decision would be a small heartbreak. but it needed to be done. As night fell, John made his way to his old bedroom. Lying in the narrow twin bed, surrounded by faded posters and high school trophies, he felt both comforted and unsettled. This place that had always been a sanctuary now felt different, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. John drifted off to sleep, unaware that in the basement below, behind a hidden panel his parents had never mentioned, lay a safe that would soon shatter everything he thought he knew about his family. The next morning, John woke to the familiar sound of seagulls. For a moment, he forgot where he was, half expecting to smell his mother's blueberry pancakes wafting up from the kitchen. Reality crashed back as he opened his eyes to the sun-faded wallpaper of his childhood room. With a deep breath, he began the task he'd been dreading. Room by room, John started sorting through his parents' belongings. The living room was first, filled with knickknacks from their travels. A miniature Eiffel Tower, a decorative plate from Greece, a hand-carved elephant from Thailand. Each object held a story, a memory that John wasn't sure he was ready to part with. In his father's study, John found himself lingering. The room smelled of leather and old books, his father's scent. He ran his fingers along the spines of law books, many of which he now had copies of in his own office. A framed photo on the desk caught his eye. His father, beaming proudly at John's law school graduation. Underneath it, a handwritten note, "To my son, who will surpass me in every way. Love, Dad." John's throat tightened. He pocketed the note and moved on. His mother's art studio in the sunroom was next. Unfinished canvases stood on easels, her paint still neatly arranged, as if waiting for her return. John remembered how she'd always say, "Life's too short not to create beauty." He wondered what her last painting would have been. As the day wore on, John found himself uncovering layers of his parents' lives he'd never known about. In a shoebox in their closet, he found love letters they'd written to each other during a brief period in college when they'd been separated. The depth of their love, expressed in those yellowed pages, brought tears to his eyes. But it wasn't all sweet discoveries. In his father's desk drawer, John found a stack of unpaid bills and a letter from a debt collector. He frowned, confused. His parents had always seemed financially comfortable. Was there more to their finances than he knew? Late in the afternoon, John decided to tackle the attic. As he climbed the creaky stairs, he felt a strange sense of anticipation. The attic had always been off-limits when he was a child, a rule he'd never quite understood. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light from the small window as John entered. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, some labeled, others not. He started with a box marked Robert, Personal. Inside he found old journals, photographs he'd never seen before, and at the bottom, a small, locked metal box. John turned it over in his hands, puzzled. He'd never seen it before, and there was no key in sight. As he set it aside to look for the key later, his elbow knocked against a floorboard. The hollow sound it made caught his attention. Curious, John pressed down on it. To his surprise, the board lifted easily, revealing a small space underneath. His heart racing, John reached into the hiding spot. His fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. He pulled it out, a key. Looking from the key to the locked box, John felt a shiver of anticipation. Whatever was in that box, his father had gone to great lengths to keep it hidden. As he inserted the key into the lock, John couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to uncover something that would change everything. The lock clicked open, and John held his breath as he lifted the lid. John's fingers trembled as he inserted the key into the locked box. The mechanism clicked softly, and he held his breath as he lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a single envelope and an odd-looking key he'd never seen before. With shaking hands, he opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, written in his father's distinctive handwriting. "My dear John, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer there to explain things in person. I'm sorry for the secrecy, but there are things about our family that you need to know. Things that, for your own safety, we kept hidden. In the basement, behind the old painting of Cape Cod Lighthouse, you'll find a safe. Use the key enclosed with this letter. What's inside will explain everything. Be careful, son. Some truths are dangerous. Love always, Dad." John read the letter twice, his mind reeling. What secrets could his parents have been keeping that required such elaborate measures? He'd always thought his childhood had been an open book. Clutching the strange key, John made his way down to the basement. The stairs creaked under his weight, each step echoing in the silence of the empty house. The musty smell of damp earth and old boxes filled his nostrils as he descended. At the bottom of the stairs, he paused, allowing his eyes to adjust to the dim light. There, on the far wall, hung the painting his father had mentioned, a weathered depiction of the Cape Cod lighthouse. John had seen it 100 times before, but had never given it much thought. With trembling hands, he lifted the frame from the wall. His breath caught in his throat. Behind it, nearly invisible against the concrete, was a small door, a door he'd never known existed. The key slid in smoothly, as if it had been waiting all these years for this moment. John turned it, hearing a soft click as the hidden door swung open. Inside the recess sat a safe about the size of a mini fridge. It was sleek and modern, a stark contrast to the old, musty basement surrounding it. John ran his hand over its cool surface, his mind racing with possibilities. What could be inside that his parents felt the need to hide so thoroughly? As he examined the safe, John noticed it had both a traditional combination lock and a keypad for a digital code. This wasn't going to be as simple as using the key he'd found. Standing there in the dim basement, the weight of unknown family secrets pressing down on him, John realized that his journey was only beginning. Whatever was in that safe, his father had gone to great lengths to both hide it and ensure John would find it. With a deep breath, John squared his shoulders. He was a lawyer, trained to uncover the truth. He'd solve this mystery, no matter what it took. But as he turned to head back upstairs and begin his investigation, a chill ran down his spine. His father's words echoed in his mind. Some truths are dangerous. What had his parents gotten involved in? And what would uncovering these secrets mean for John's own life? As he climbed the stairs, John couldn't shake the feeling that by opening that hidden door, he'd set in motion events that would change everything he thought he knew about his family and himself. John spent the next several hours attempting to crack the safe's combination. He tried every significant date he could think of, his parents' birthdays, their anniversary, his own birthday, even the day they'd bought this summer house. Nothing worked. Frustration mounting, he turned his attention to the digital keypad. Again, he input various number combinations that might be meaningful to his parents. Still, the safe remained stubbornly closed. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the basement, John sat back on his heels, running a hand through his hair. He'd been so sure he'd be able to figure this out. After all, wasn't this the kind of logical puzzle lawyers were supposed to excel at? Deciding he needed a break, John climbed the stairs back to the main floor. He made himself a strong cup of coffee in the kitchen, leaning against the counter and staring out at the darkening ocean beyond the window. What was he missing? His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Sarah. "How's it going? Found anything interesting?" John's thumb hovered over the keypad. Should he tell her about the safe? Something held him back. "Just old memories," he replied. "I'll be home tomorrow." As he put the phone down, his eyes fell on a framed photo on the kitchen wall. It was a picture of his parents on their wedding day, standing in front of this very house. They looked so young, so happy. His mother's smile was radiant, his father's eyes twinkling with joy and something else. Pride? Secret knowledge? John moved closer to the photo, studying it intently. There, in the background, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, was the lighthouse from the painting in the basement. And on its side, barely legible, were some numbers. Heart racing, John rushed back to the basement. He input the numbers into the digital keypad. Nothing happened. Disappointed but not defeated, he tried the combination lock instead. Click. The safe door swung open. For a moment, John just stared, hardly daring to breathe. Then slowly he reached inside. There were several manila envelopes, a small wooden box, and, to his surprise, a handgun. As he pulled out the first envelope, a chill ran down his spine. Whatever was in here, his father had felt the need to have protection. "Some truths are dangerous," echoed in his mind. With trembling hands, John opened the first envelope. Several documents slid out: birth certificates, newspaper clippings, and what looked like private investigator reports. As he began to read, his eyes widened in shock. This couldn't be right. According to these documents, he, John Smith, had been born a twin. He had a sister. John sank to the floor, documents scattered around him, his mind reeling. A sister? How was this possible? Why had his parents never told him? As the initial shock began to wear off, questions flooded his mind. Where was she now? Why had she been kept a secret? And most importantly, what had happened to her? John realized that the mystery of the safe was only the beginning. He'd uncovered a secret that would shake the very foundations of everything he thought he knew about his family and himself. As he sat there in the dim basement, surrounded by the ghosts of family secrets, John made a promise to himself. He would uncover the truth, no matter where it led him. He owed it to himself, to his parents, and to the sister he never knew he had. Little did he know that his quest for answers would lead him down a dangerous path, one that would test not just his legal skills, but his courage and his very understanding of right and wrong. The safe was open, but the real mystery was just beginning. With shaking hands, John began to sort through the contents of the safe. The birth certificates were first, his own, which he'd seen before, and another. Emily Smith, born on the same day, at the same hospital, his twin sister. Next came the newspaper clippings. Headlines screamed at him from yellowed pages. Local twins separated by tragedy. Kidnapping shocks quiet Cape Cod town. Parents plead for return of missing toddler. The articles detailed a horrific event that had taken place when John was just 2 years old. His sister, Emily, had been kidnapped from their backyard. The kidnappers had demanded a ransom, which his parents had paid, but Emily was never returned. John's mind reeled. How could he not remember any of this? How had his parents kept this hidden for so long? He turned his attention to the small wooden box. Inside, he found a collection of photographs, baby pictures of 2 infants, nearly identical, toddlers playing together on this very beach, and then abruptly, the photos showed only one child, him. The absence of his sister was suddenly glaring, a void he'd never known existed. At the bottom of the box was a single worn photograph of a young woman, maybe in her early 20s. She had John's eyes and his mother's smile. On the back, written in his father's handwriting, Emily, 2019. John's heart raced. Had his father found her? Was she still alive? He turned to the private investigator reports next. They spanned years, detailing countless leads followed, all ending in dead ends. The most recent was dated just a month before his parents' accident. It mentioned a possible sighting in Seattle, but the trail had gone cold. Finally, John picked up the gun. It was a .38 revolver, loaded. A note was wrapped around the handle. For protection, trust no one. Dad. The weight of the gun in his hand made the danger feel real. Whatever had happened to Emily, whoever had taken her, his father had feared they might come for John too. As the night wore on, John pored over the documents, piecing together a narrative that shook him to his core. The kidnapping had devastated his parents. They'd spent years searching for Emily, following every lead, no matter how slim. But as time passed and the trail grew colder, they'd made a heartbreaking decision. To protect John, to give him a normal life, they'd erased all traces of Emily from their home and their conversations. They'd moved away, started fresh, never speaking of her again. But they'd never stopped looking. The private investigator reports proved that. His father had continued the search in secret, right up until the end. As dawn broke, John sat amidst the scattered documents, emotionally and physically exhausted. He had a sister out there somewhere, a twin he'd never known, and she might still be alive. The lawyer in him wanted to approach this methodically, to analyze the evidence and plot a careful course of action. But another part of him, a part awakened by this revelation, burned with an urgent need to find her, to make his family whole again. As he gathered the documents, a small scrap of paper fluttered to the floor. It was a handwritten note in his mother's elegant script. "The lighthouse holds the key." John's brow furrowed. The lighthouse from the painting? The one that had given him the combination to the safe? What other secrets did it hold? He realized that opening the safe was just the beginning. He was standing on the threshold of a mystery decades in the making, one that would challenge everything he thought he knew about his family, his childhood, and himself. With determination setting his jaw, John knew what he had to do. he would find Emily. He would uncover the truth about her disappearance. And he would finally understand the secret that had shaped his entire life without him even knowing it. As he climbed the basement stairs, the weight of his father's gun tucked into his waistband, John couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The quest for truth was beginning, but so too were the dangers his father had warned about. The safe was empty now, but the real journey was just beginning. With shaking hands, John began to sort through the contents of the safe. The birth certificates were first, his own, which he'd seen before, and another. Emily Smith, born on the same day at the same hospital, his twin sister. Next came the newspaper clippings. Headlines screamed at him from yellowed pages. Local twins separated by tragedy. Kidnapping shocks quiet Cape Cod town. Parents plead for return of missing toddler. The articles detailed a horrific event that had taken place when John was just 2 years old. His sister, Emily, had been kidnapped from their backyard. The kidnappers had demanded a ransom, which his parents had paid, but Emily was never returned. John's mind reeled. How could he not remember any of this? How had his parents kept this hidden for so long? He turned his attention to the small wooden box. Inside, he found a collection of photographs. Baby pictures of 2 infants, nearly identical. Toddlers playing together on this very beach. And then, abruptly, the photos showed only one child, him. The absence of his sister was suddenly glaring, a void he'd never known existed. At the bottom of the box was a single worn photograph of a young woman, maybe in her early 20s. She had John's eyes and his mother's smile. On the back, written in his father's handwriting, Emily, 2019. John's heart raced. Had his father found her? Was she still alive? He turned to the private investigator reports next. They spanned years, detailing countless leads followed, all ending in dead ends. The most recent was dated just a month before his parents' accident. It mentioned a possible sighting in Seattle, but the trail had gone cold. Finally, John picked up the gun. It was a .38 revolver, loaded. A note was wrapped around the handle. For protection. Trust no one. Dad. The weight of the gun in his hand made the danger feel real. Whatever had happened to Emily, whoever had taken her, his father had feared they might come for John too. As the night wore on, John pored over the documents, piecing together a narrative that shook him to his core. The kidnapping had devastated his parents. They'd spent years searching for Emily, following every lead, no matter how slim. But as time passed and the trail grew colder, they'd made a heartbreaking decision. To protect John, to give him a normal life, they'd erased all traces of Emily from their home and their conversations. They'd moved away, started fresh, never speaking of her again. But they'd never stopped looking. The private investigator reports proved that. His father had continued the search in secret, right up until the end. As dawn broke, John sat amidst the scattered documents, emotionally and physically exhausted. He had a sister out there somewhere, a twin he'd never known, and she might still be alive. The safe was empty now, but the real journey was just beginning. With shaking hands, John began to sort through the contents of the safe. The birth certificates were first, his own, which he'd seen before, and another. Emily Smith, born on the same day at the same hospital, his twin sister. Next came the newspaper clippings. Headlines screamed at him from yellowed pages. Local twins separated by tragedy. Kidnapping shocks quiet Cape Cod town. Parents plead for return of missing toddler. The articles detailed a horrific event that had taken place when John was just 2 years old. His sister, Emily, had been kidnapped from their backyard. The kidnappers had demanded a ransom, which his parents had paid, but Emily was never returned. John's mind reeled. How could he not remember any of this? How had his parents kept this hidden for so long? He turned his attention to the small wooden box. Inside, he found a collection of photographs. Baby pictures of 2 infants, nearly identical. Toddlers playing together on this very beach. And then, abruptly, the photos showed only one child, him. The absence of his sister was suddenly glaring, a void he'd never known existed. At the bottom of the box was a single worn photograph of a young woman, maybe in her early 20s. She had John's eyes and his mother's smile. On the back, written in his father's handwriting, Emily, 2019. John's heart raced. Had his father found her? Was she still alive? He turned to the private investigator reports next. They spanned years, detailing countless leads followed, all ending in dead ends. The most recent was dated just a month before his parents' accident. It mentioned a possible sighting in Seattle, but the trail had gone cold. Finally, John picked up the gun. It was a .38 revolver, loaded. A note was wrapped around the handle. For protection. Trust no one. Dad. The weight of the gun in his hand made the danger feel real. Whatever had happened to Emily, whoever had taken her, his father had feared they might come for John too. As the night wore on, John pored over the documents, piecing together a narrative that shook him to his core. The kidnapping had devastated his parents. They'd spent years searching for Emily, following every lead, no matter how slim. But as time passed and the trail grew colder, they'd made a heartbreaking decision. To protect John, to give him a normal life, they'd erased all traces of Emily from their home and their conversations. They'd moved away, started fresh, never speaking of her again. But they'd never stopped looking. The private investigator reports proved that. His father had continued the search in secret, right up until the end. As dawn broke, John sat amidst the scattered documents, emotionally and physically exhausted. He had a sister out there somewhere, a twin he'd never known, and she might still be alive. Digging deeper into his father's cases from that time, John uncovered a troubling pattern. In the years leading up to Emily's kidnapping, Robert Smith had been involved in several major prosecutions of organized crime figures. He'd helped put away some very dangerous people. One name kept appearing in his father's notes: Viktor Petrov, a Russian mob boss who'd sworn vengeance on Robert Smith after being sentenced to life in prison. The last note mentioning Petrov was dated just a week before Emily's kidnapping. John's blood ran cold. Could this be the connection? Had his sister been taken as an act of revenge? But if that was the case, why had the kidnapping never been solved? His father had clearly never stopped looking. The private investigator reports spanned decades, following leads across the country and even internationally. The most recent report, dated just weeks before his parents' accident, contained a blurry surveillance photo. A young woman with familiar eyes, caught on camera in a Seattle farmer's market. Could this really be Emily? As John stared at the photo, trying to see himself in the stranger's features, a new thought struck him. The timing of his parents' accident, so soon after this potential lead, was it truly an accident? The weight of his father's gun, which John had taken to carrying, suddenly felt heavier. His father's warning echoed in his mind: trust no one. John realized he was standing at a crossroads. He could turn this information over to the authorities, let them reopen the case. It would be the safe, logical thing to do, the thing the lawyer in him knew he should do. Or he could pursue this himself, follow in his father's footsteps and seek out the truth that had eluded them for so long. It would be dangerous, possibly illegal. But looking at the photo of the woman who might be his sister, John knew he couldn't just stand by. He made his decision. He would go to Seattle, follow this lead himself. But first, he needed more information. There were still gaps in the story, details his parents had taken to their grave. John picked up his phone, hesitating for just a moment before dialing. The voice that answered was gruff, cautious. "Uncle Tom? It's John. We need to talk. It's about Emily." The sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line told John that the family's secrets ran deeper than he'd imagined. The real investigation was about to begin. The meeting with Uncle Tom was tense from the start. They sat in a quiet corner of a local diner, the clatter of dishes and murmur of conversations providing a buffer of white noise around them. "I always knew this day might come," Tom said, his face etched with a mixture of guilt and relief. "Your father. He made us all swear to keep it secret for your protection," he said. John leaned forward, his voice low but intense. "I need to know everything, Uncle Tom. No more secrets." Over the next 2 hours, Tom filled in the gaps of the story. He spoke of the frantic days after Emily's kidnapping, the family's desperation, and the dark turn the investigation had taken. "Your father, he didn't just rely on the police. He called in favors, hired private investigators, even reached out to some less than savory characters from his past cases. He was obsessed with finding Emily." Tom's revelation about his father's connections to the underworld shook John. It painted a picture of Robert Smith he'd never imagined, a man willing to blur the lines between right and wrong in his desperate search for his daughter. There was a lead. About a year after she vanished, Tom continued, his voice dropping even lower. Your father thought he'd found her. He flew to Chicago on his own, didn't tell anyone but me. When he came back, he was different, harder. That's when he decided to move the family, to hide you away. John's mind raced. What happened in Chicago? Tom shook his head. He never told me. But whatever it was, it scared him enough to give up his high-profile career and move to Boston, to raise you as if Emily had never existed. Armed with this new information, John threw himself into the investigation. He took a leave of absence from his law firm, much to Sarah's concern. I can't explain it all now, he told her, but this is something I have to do. He started by digging into his father's old case files, particularly those involving Viktor Petrov. The Russian mobster had indeed sworn vengeance, but he'd been in prison when Emily was taken. Could he have orchestrated it from behind bars? John's research led him to retired Detective Michael Harrison, the lead investigator on Emily's case. Their meeting in Harrison's small apartment was revelatory. Your father was convinced it was Petrov, Harrison said, rifling through old case notes. But something never sat right with me about that theory. The ransom demand, the way the kidnapping was carried out, it didn't fit Petrov's MO. Then who? John pressed. Harrison's eyes met John's, a hint of fear in them. There was another possibility we looked into, one your father refused to consider. We had reason to believe the kidnapping might have been carried out by someone closer to home. John felt a chill run down his spine. What are you saying? Your mother, Harrison said softly. There were inconsistencies in her story, and her behavior in the days after. It was off. We never found any hard evidence, so we couldn't pursue it, but I always wondered. The suggestion that his mother might have been involved in Emily's disappearance hit John like a physical blow. He left Harrison's apartment in a daze, his world tilted on its axis. As he walked the streets of Boston, trying to process this new information, John's phone buzzed. An email from one of the private investigators his father had hired, responding to John's earlier inquiry. The message was brief, but it made John's heart race. Found something. Meet me at the old lighthouse. Come alone. Trust no one. John hesitated, his father's gun a heavy presence against his side. The lighthouse, the same one from the painting, the one his mother's note had mentioned. Whatever answers lay there, John knew they would change everything. As he hailed a taxi to take him to Cape Cod, John couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The quest for truth was leading him into dangerous waters, and he was beginning to understand why his father had kept these secrets buried for so long. But there was no turning back now. Emily was out there, and the truth about her disappearance lay somewhere in the tangled web of family secrets and old dangers. John was determined to unravel it all, no matter the cost. Little did he know that his journey was about to take an even darker turn, one that would test not just his resolve, but his very understanding of family, loyalty, and truth. The old lighthouse stood sentinel on the rocky Cape Cod shore, its weathered exterior hiding secrets John was only beginning to uncover. As he approached, the wind whipping around him, he saw a figure waiting at the base. It was his cousin, Michael, Uncle Tom's son. Michael, what are you doing here? John called out, confusion and wariness in his voice. Michael's face was grim. Dad told me you were asking questions. I couldn't let you come here alone, John. It's not safe. Before John could respond, the door to the lighthouse creaked open. Out stepped Amanda, his father's younger sister, her face a mask of anxiety. Both of you, inside, quickly. Once inside the musty interior of the lighthouse, John found himself facing not just Michael and Amanda, but also his Uncle Tom and another cousin, Lisa. The family gathering felt more like an intervention than a meeting. What's going on? John demanded. Where's the private investigator? Uncle Tom stepped forward, his expression pained. There is no investigator, John. We sent that email. We needed to get you here, away from prying eyes and ears. John's hand instinctively moved towards the gun at his waist. Why? What aren't you telling me? Amanda placed a calming hand on John's arm. We're here to tell you everything, John, the whole truth. But you need to understand, this knowledge comes with a price. Once you know, there's no going back. Over the next hour, the story unfolded. The family had been bound by a pact of secrecy for decades, each member carrying a piece of the puzzle. Uncle Tom spoke of the day Emily disappeared, revealing details that had been kept from John. "Your mother, she wasn't in the garden that day. She was inside the house, arguing with a man. I saw him leave just before we realized Emily was gone." "Who was he?" John asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lisa, her eyes brimming with tears, answered, "It was my father, your Uncle James." The revelation hit John like a physical blow. Uncle James, his mother's brother, who had died in a car accident when John was young. Or had he? Michael picked up the thread. Uncle James was involved in some shady dealings, money laundering, mostly. He'd gotten in too deep with some dangerous people. He came to your parents for help. "But what does this have to do with Emily?" John pressed. Amanda's voice was soft, filled with old pain. "James was desperate. He thought if he could stage a kidnapping, get your parents to pay a ransom, he could pay off his debts. It wasn't supposed to go this far." The pieces started falling into place in John's mind. "So Emily wasn't taken by strangers? It was Uncle James?" Tom nodded gravely. "Your father figured it out. That trip to Chicago, he found James and Emily. But by then, it was too late to simply bring her back. The men James owed, they knew about Emily. They threatened to hurt her, to hurt all of us, if your father didn't help them make their problem with James disappear." John's head spun. "So my father, what? Covered up a kidnapping? Left his own daughter with criminals?" "He made an impossible choice," Amanda said softly. "To protect you, to protect all of us. He and your mother decided to make it look like Emily had never come home. James was declared dead in that fake car accident. And Emily was given a new identity, placed with a trusted friend of your father's." The weight of the truth settled on John like a physical presence. His sister hadn't been lost. She'd been hidden, protected through a web of lies that had ensnared his entire family. "She's alive?" John asked, hope and anger warring in his voice. Lisa nodded. "The woman in Seattle, that was her. Your father had found her again, was trying to figure out a way to bring her home safely. But then the accident." John's mind raced. The accident that had claimed his parents' lives, had it truly been an accident? Or had the dangerous men from Uncle James's past finally caught up with them? As the family's secrets lay bare in the old lighthouse, John realized that finding Emily was only the beginning. There were still dangers lurking, old debts unpaid, and a sister who had no idea of her true identity. "Tell me everything," John said, his jaw set with determination. "Every detail, every name. It's time to end this, once and for all." As his family began to unravel the complex tapestry of lies and secrets, John knew that his life would never be the same. The search for Emily had become a mission to uncover the truth, protect his family, and perhaps finally bring his long-lost sister home. The lighthouse keeper's quarters became a war room, with John at the center, piecing together the fragmented story of his family's past. Little did he know that across the country, in a small Seattle apartment, a woman named Emily was about to receive a phone call that would shatter her own understanding of who she was, and set in motion a collision course with the brother she never knew she had. As John absorbed the shocking revelations from his family, a new piece of information surfaced that would change everything he thought he knew about his parents. Lisa, her hands shaking slightly, pulled out an old, worn envelope from her bag. "There's more, John. Something I found in my father's things after he died. I think you need to see this." Inside the envelope was a series of documents that, at first glance, seemed innocuous. Birth certificates, marriage licenses, and passports. But as John examined them closer, his blood ran cold. The birth certificates were for Robert and Mary Smith, his parents, but the names and dates didn't match what he knew. According to these documents, Robert Smith was born Jason Keller, and Mary Smith was originally Sarah Brennan. They were both 5 years younger than John had always believed. "What is this?" John asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Uncle Tom stepped forward, his face grave. "Your parents, they weren't who we thought they were either. They were in witness protection." The revelation hit John like a physical blow. Witness protection? For what? Amanda took a deep breath before continuing. "Before they were Robert and Mary Smith, your parents were key witnesses in a major federal case against the Costello crime family. They helped bring down one of the biggest organized crime syndicates on the East Coast. The pieces started falling into place in John's mind. His father's legal brilliance, his mother's constant vigilance, the family's sudden move from New York to Boston when he was young. It all made sense now. So when Emily was taken, John started. It complicated everything, Tom finished. Your parents couldn't go to the authorities without risking their cover being blown. They were trapped between their past and their present. John's mind raced. But why keep up the charade after Emily was safe? Why not come clean? Lisa's voice was soft as she answered. Because the danger never really went away. The Costellos had a long memory and an even longer reach. Your parents lived every day knowing that if their true identities were discovered, it would put not just them, but you and Emily in grave danger. As the full weight of his family's secret identity settled on him, John realized that finding Emily was only part of the puzzle. There were larger, more dangerous forces at play. He turned to his uncle, a new determination in his eyes. I need to know everything, every detail about the Costello case, every player involved. If we're going to find Emily and keep her safe, we need to understand what we're really up against. For the next several hours, the lighthouse keeper's quarters became a hub of frantic activity. John's legal pad filled with names, dates, and connections as his family shared everything they knew about his parents' past life and the dangers that still lurked in the shadows. As dawn broke, casting a pale light through the lighthouse windows, John stood looking out at the ocean, his mind a whirlwind of information and emotion. He was no longer just John Smith, a successful Boston lawyer. He was the son of Jason Keller and Sarah Brennan, witnesses against one of the most dangerous crime families in American history. And somewhere out there was his sister Emily, unaware of the true danger she was in. John's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from an unknown number. Your sister is safe for now, but they know. Meet me at the place where it all began. Come alone. As he showed the message to his family, a tense silence fell over the room. The place where it all began. It could only mean one thing. New York City, where his parents had first entered witness protection. John knew that going there alone was dangerous, possibly a trap. But it was also the best lead they had on Emily's whereabouts and the threats surrounding her. As he prepared to leave, Uncle Tom pressed something into his hand. It was a key. Your father left this with me. Said if anything ever happened to him, I should give it to you when the time was right. It's to a safety deposit box in New York. Whatever's inside, he thought it was worth protecting. John nodded, pocketing the key. As he said goodbye to his family, each hug felt like it could be the last. The weight of his father's gun, tucked securely in its holster, was a constant reminder of the dangers ahead. As John drove towards New York, his mind raced with possibilities. Who had sent the text? Was it a friend or foe? And what secrets would he uncover in the city where his parents had once lived a completely different life? One thing was certain. The search for Emily had become much more than a family matter. It was now a race against time, with the shadows of the past threatening to engulf them all. Little did John know that as he sped towards New York, events were already in motion that would force him to confront not just the dangers of his parents' past, but also make impossible choices that would test his own moral compass and definition of justice. The New York City skyline loomed before John as he navigated the bustling streets, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. His first stop was the bank where his father's safety deposit box was located. As John opened the box with the key Uncle Tom had given him, he found himself holding his breath. Inside was a USB drive, a handwritten letter, and a small, leather-bound journal. John's hands trembled as he unfolded his father's letter. My son, if you're reading this, then the truth has finally come to light. I'm sorry for the lies, for the secrets. Everything we did was to protect you and Emily. But now, I fear our past has caught up with us. The USB drive contains evidence, names, dates, transactions. It's everything we had on the Costello family and more. Information we've gathered over the years, insurance against the day they might come for us again. The journal is your mother's. It tells the whole story, from the beginning. It will help you understand. Be careful, John. Trust no one completely. And remember, the law isn't always just, and justice isn't always legal. I love you. Find your sister. Finish what we started, Dad. John tucked the items securely into his jacket, his lawyer's mind already grappling with the ethical implications of what he'd just inherited. This evidence could bring down what remained of the Costello empire, but using it meant exposing his parents' past and potentially putting Emily in even greater danger. As he left the bank, a familiar face caught his eye across the street. Detective Michael Harrison, the retired cop who had worked on Emily's kidnapping case, was watching him. Their eyes met, and Harrison nodded toward a nearby cafe. Seated in a quiet corner, Harrison spoke in low, urgent tones. "I've been following the Costello case for years, even after retirement. Your parents reached out to me, just before." He trailed off, the memory of their accident still raw. "Why you?" John asked. "Because I was the only one who knew both halves of their life, the Smiths in Boston and the Kellers in New York." Harrison leaned in closer. "John, the accident that killed your parents, it wasn't an accident." The words hit John like a physical blow. "You're sure?" Harrison nodded grimly. "The Costellos found out they were gathering evidence again. They tried to tie up loose ends, but they don't know about you or Emily. Not yet." As they talked, John began to understand the full scope of what he was dealing with. His parents hadn't just been witnesses, they'd been informants, gathering evidence for years. Their death had been a silencing move by a desperate crime family. "What do I do now?" John asked, feeling the weight of his parents' legacy on his shoulders. Harrison's eyes were steely. "You have a choice to make, John. You can turn over the evidence to the FBI, let them handle it. It's the legal thing to do. Or, John prompted, or you can do what your parents did. Work from the shadows. Use the information to find Emily, to protect her. But know this, once you step outside the law, even for the right reasons, there's no going back." As John left the cafe, his mind was reeling. The legal and ethical implications of his discoveries were staggering. Use the evidence legally and risk Emily's safety, or operate in the shadows like his parents and compromise everything he believed in as a lawyer? His phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. "Time's running out. Pier 17, midnight. Come alone if you want to see your sister alive." John's heart raced. He had hours to make a decision that would change everything. As he walked the streets of New York, the city his parents had once called home, he felt the weight of their choices, their sacrifices. He found himself outside the courthouse where his father had once practiced law. Looking up at the scales of justice adorning the building, John realized that the line between right and wrong had never been so blurred. As the sun began to set over the city, John made his decision. He would go to the pier, but not before making preparations. He had evidence that could topple an empire, a gun that represented the dangers ahead, and a moral compass that was about to be tested like never before. Whatever awaited him at Pier 17, John knew that by midnight, he would either be reunited with the sister he never knew, or he would be stepping into a world his parents had tried so hard to protect him from. Either way, there was no turning back now. As the hours ticked down towards midnight, John found himself in a small, dimly lit hotel room, spreading out the contents of his mother's journal on the bed. With each page he turned, the foundations of his identity seemed to crumble further. The journal detailed his parents' life before witness protection, their initial involvement with the Costello family, the moment they decided to turn informant, and the harrowing escape that led to their new identities. But it was the entries about John and Emily's early years that truly shook him. One passage made his heart stop. July 15th, 1989, our beautiful twins were born today. John Jason and Emily Sarah Keller. If only they could know their true heritage, the sacrifices we've made, someday perhaps, when it's safe. For now, they must be John and Emily Smith, born to Robert and Mary, not to Jason and Sarah. The weight of this lie is almost unbearable. John sat back, his mind reeling. Even his birthday was a fabrication. He was older than he thought, born in New York, not Boston. Every childhood memory, every family story, all carefully constructed lies. He looked in the mirror, seeing his features in a new light. Did he look more like Jason Keller than Robert Smith? Was his entire personality shaped by this grand deception? As he continued reading, John discovered more shocking truths. His parents' decision to separate the twins hadn't been made lightly. They believed that keeping John and Emily apart would make it harder for their enemies to find them. Every major life decision, where they lived, where John went to school, even his encouragement to become a lawyer, had been part of an elaborate plan to keep him safe and unsuspecting. John's phone buzzed, reminding him of the impending meeting at Pier 17. As he gathered his things, including his father's gun and the USB drive of evidence, he felt like a stranger in his own skin. Who was he really? John Smith, the successful Boston lawyer with a normal, if somewhat distant, family history. Or John Keller, son of informants, twin brother to a long-lost sister, born into a world of danger and deception. As he made his way to the pier, the New York night alive around him, John grappled with his shifting identity. Everything he thought he knew about himself was based on a carefully crafted lie. Yet, the values his parents had instilled in him, the belief in justice, the importance of family, the courage to stand up for what's right, were those lies too. He thought about his career, his relationships. How much of his life had been subtly guided by his parents' hidden agenda? Had his choice to become a lawyer really been his own, or was it a path laid out for him long ago? Approaching Pier 17, the weight of the gun at his side felt both foreign and familiar. He realized that perhaps he was more like Jason and Sarah Keller than he had ever known. The readiness to step outside the law for a greater good, the ability to navigate dangerous waters, it was in his blood. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, John made a decision. Regardless of his name or his past, he was still the sum of his experiences, choices, and beliefs. He would use everything he had learned, both as John Smith and as the newly discovered John Keller, to find Emily and uncover the truth. The pier loomed ahead, dark and foreboding. Whatever and whoever awaited him there would be facing not just John Smith or John Keller, but a man coming to terms with the complex tapestry of his identity. A man ready to bridge the gap between his past and his future, between law and justice, between the life he knew and the life he was about to discover. Taking a deep breath, John stepped out of the shadows and onto the pier. The moment of truth had arrived, and with it the chance to finally uncover the last pieces of his fractured identity. As John stepped onto Pier 17, the salt air whipping around him, he felt eyes watching his every move. The wooden planks creaked under his feet, each sound amplified in the eerie midnight quiet. He moved cautiously, one hand close to the concealed gun at his waist. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. John Smith, or should I say John Keller. The man's face was hidden beneath the brim of a hat, but his voice was cold, calculated. John tensed, ready for anything. "Who are you? Where's Emily?" John demanded. The man chuckled darkly. "Emily? Oh, she's safe, for now. But that's not why you're here, is it?" "You're here for answers." Before John could respond, a shot rang out. The man crumpled to the ground, revealing another figure behind him, gun still raised. "Run!" a female voice shouted. It was familiar somehow, but John had no time to process it. More shots echoed across the pier. John sprinted down the pier, his heart pounding. He could hear footsteps in pursuit. Ducking behind a stack of crates, he drew his own weapon, trying to catch his breath and make sense of the situation. "John!" the female voice called out again, closer now. "It's me. It's Emily." His sister. It had to be. But could he trust her? Making a split-second decision, John revealed himself. The woman before him was a mirror image of himself, but with long hair and fierce eyes. There was no doubt this was his twin. "We don't have much time," Emily said urgently. "They're coming. The Costellos know about the evidence." As if on cue, more shots rang out. John and Emily ran together, weaving through the maze of the pier. "How did you find me?" John gasped as they ran. "The same way you found me," Emily replied. "Dad's clues, but we're not the only ones looking. The Costellos have informants everywhere. They've been watching both of us." They reached the end of the pier, trapped between their pursuers and the dark water below. Emily grabbed John's arm. "Do you trust me?" Without waiting for an answer, she pulled him over the edge. They plunged into the icy water, just as more bullets whizzed overhead. Swimming silently, they made their way to a small boat hidden in the shadows. Once aboard, Emily quickly started the engine and steered them away from the pier. As the New York skyline receded behind them, John finally had a moment to process what had happened. He was with his sister. the missing piece of his life he hadn't known existed until days ago. But instead of joyful reunion, they were fleeing for their lives. "Emily," John started, his voice hoarse. "What's going on? Who were those men?" Emily's eyes were fixed on the horizon as she spoke. "It's a long story, John, but the short version is this. Mom and Dad's past caught up with them. The Costellos found out they were gathering evidence again. That's why." Her voice broke slightly. "That's why they were killed." John felt a chill that had nothing to do with his wet clothes. "So it wasn't an accident." Emily shook her head. "No. And now that you've accessed Dad's safety deposit box, they're after us too. They think we have the evidence." "We do," John said, thinking of the USB drive securely hidden in his waterproof inner pocket. "At least I do." Emily's eyes widened. "You have it, John? Do you have any idea how dangerous that is?" Before John could respond, the sound of another boat engine cut through the night. Emily cursed under her breath. "They've found us. Hold on." As Emily steered the boat into a series of evasive maneuvers, John realized that the pursuit was far from over. Someone powerful desperately wanted to keep the truth buried, and they were willing to kill to make sure it stayed that way. As bullets began to pepper the water around them, John knew that the next few hours would determine not just their fate, but the fate of the evidence that could bring down an entire criminal empire. The truth was fighting to be revealed, and John and Emily were caught in the crossfire. With the dark waters of New York Harbor churning around them and danger closing in from all sides, the reunited twins faced an uncertain future. But for the first time, they faced it together, ready to uncover the final pieces of their family's complex and dangerous puzzle. The twins' boat sped through the dark waters, the pursuing vessel gaining ground with each passing moment. Emily's knuckles were white on the wheel as she navigated the treacherous currents of the East River. "We can't outrun them forever," John shouted over the roar of the engine. "We need a plan," Emily nodded grimly. "There's a safe house. Dad set it up years ago. If we can make it there, we might have a chance." As they approached the shore, the pursuing boat suddenly veered off. John's relief was short-lived as he saw why. A helicopter was now hovering above them, its spotlight pinning them in a harsh glare. "It's the Costellos," Emily growled. "They're pulling out all the stops." They abandoned the boat at a small, hidden dock and ran into the maze of Brooklyn's waterfront warehouses. The sound of the helicopter grew distant, but they could hear cars screeching nearby. Their pursuers were closing in. Breathless, they reached a nondescript building. Emily punched in a code, and they slipped inside just as a black SUV rounded the corner. The safe house was sparse, but well-equipped. As Emily secured the doors, John pulled out the USB drive. "We need to know what's on this," he said. "Whatever it is, it's worth killing for." They huddled around a laptop as the files loaded. What they saw made their blood run cold. It wasn't just evidence against the Costello family. It was a comprehensive record of corruption that reached into the highest levels of government and law enforcement. "My God," Emily whispered. "This is why they couldn't go to the authorities. The whole system is compromised." Suddenly, the building shook with an explosion. Their pursuers had found them. "There's one more thing you need to see," Emily said urgently, pulling out a tablet. She pulled up a video file, their father's last message. Robert Smith, or rather Jason Keller, looked haggard in the video, his eyes haunted. "John, Emily, if you're watching this, then our worst fears have come to pass. The truth you're about to learn will be hard to bear, but you need to know." He took a deep breath. "The Costello case goes deeper than you can imagine. We didn't just witness a crime, we were part of it. Your mother and I, we were deep undercover agents, planted within the Costello organization years before you were born. But somewhere along the line, the mission became blurred. We did things, terrible things in the name of maintaining our cover." Another explosion rocked the building. The door wouldn't hold much longer. "We gathered the evidence to make things right," their father continued. "But we realized the corruption had spread too far. We couldn't trust anyone. That's why we ran, why we separated you. It was the only way to keep you safe." Tears streamed down Emily's face as their father's final words came through. "We love you both so much. Whatever you decide to do with this information, know that we are proud of you. Stay together, trust each other. And remember, the truth, no matter how painful, is always worth fighting for. The video ended just as the door burst open. Armed men flooded in, led by a face John recognized from the files, Anthony Costello, the new head of the family. Well, well, Costello sneered. The prodigal twins, reunited at last. Your parents were a thorn in my father's side for years. It's fitting that I'll be the one to end their legacy. John and Emily stood side by side, the USB drive clutched tightly in John's hand. They exchanged a look, years of separation melting away in an instant of perfect understanding. You want the truth, Costello? John said, his voice steady. Here it is. With that, he tossed the drive to Emily, who swiftly connected it to a device on her wrist. In seconds, the files were uploading to servers across the globe, spreading the evidence far and wide. Costello's face contorted with rage. You fools! Do you have any idea what you've done? As the sound of police sirens filled the air, honest cops responding to the explosions, John smiled grimly. We've finished what our parents started. The truth is out there now. No one can stop it. Costello raised his gun, but before he could fire, the windows exploded in a hail of gunfire. FBI agents repelled into the room, led by none other than Detective Harrison. FBI, everybody down! In the chaos that followed, John and Emily clung to each other, finally safe, finally together. As the dust settled, they knew that their lives would never be the same. The family secret was out, for better or worse, and the world was about to change. Harrison approached them, his face somber. You two have a lot of explaining to do, but first, there's someone you should meet. He stepped aside, revealing a familiar face. The man from the pier, very much alive. Mom? Dad? Emily gasped. The man smiled sadly. Not quite. I'm your uncle, your father's twin brother, and I've been protecting you both from the shadows all these years. As sirens wailed and cameras flashed outside, John and Emily realized that their journey was far from over. The truth was out, but its consequences were just beginning to unfold. In the days following the dramatic confrontation at the warehouse, John and Emily found themselves at the center of a media hurricane. The exposure of widespread corruption shook the foundations of power, triggering a series of investigations, arrests, and resignations at all levels of government and law enforcement. John, now publicly known as John Keller, faced a whirlwind of emotions. The joy of finding his twin sister was overshadowed by the magnitude of the revelations about their parents and the extent of the conspiracy they had uncovered. John's law firm placed him on administrative leave, citing conflict of interest and the need for distance from the media storm. His colleagues looked at him with a mixture of admiration and mistrust, unsure if he was a hero or a threat to the stability they knew. Sarah, John's wife, struggled to process everything that had happened. I married John Smith, she said during a tense conversation. I'm not sure who John Keller is. Their marriage, already strained due to John's obsession with selling his parents' house, now faced its greatest challenge. Emily, on the other hand, seemed to thrive under the spotlight. Years of living in the shadows had prepared her for this moment. She became the unofficial spokesperson for the twins, skillfully navigating interviews and press conferences. The twins' uncle, who revealed himself to be Daniel Keller, filled in many of the gaps in their family history. He explained how he had worked tirelessly behind the scenes to protect John and Emily, always one step ahead of the Costellos. Your parents knew that one day the truth would come out, Daniel told them during a private conversation. They hoped it would be on their own terms, but they were prepared for all eventualities. The house in Cape Cod, which had been the catalyst for John's entire journey, was now under police protection. Forensic teams combed through every inch of the property, uncovering more hiding places and evidence their parents had left behind. As the dust began to settle, John and Emily found themselves having to make crucial decisions about their future. The government offered them witness protection, a chance to disappear and start anew, but after a lifetime of secrets, the idea of another false identity was unbearable for both of them. We can't run from this, John told Emily one night as they looked out over the New York skyline from a safe house. Our parents spent their lives fighting against this. Now it's our turn to finish what they started. Emily nodded, a determined glint in her eyes. Together, she said, gripping her brother's hand. As the world around them continued in turmoil, the Keller twins prepared to face the consequences of their actions and the truths they had exposed. The path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in their lives, they were not alone. The revelation of the truth had shaken the foundations of their lives, but it had also created an opportunity to rebuild something new and stronger. As they prepared to face the challenges that would come, John and Emily knew that their parents' complicated legacy would be both a burden and a source of strength in the days to come. In the weeks that followed, John Keller found himself at a crossroads. The world he had known had been turned upside down, and he was forced to reevaluate every aspect of his life. His legal career, once a source of pride and stability, now seemed trivial in the face of the massive corruption he had uncovered. The law firm had made it clear that his return would be complicated, if not impossible. John realized that his passion for justice could no longer be confined to the courtroom. After much soul-searching and lengthy discussions with Emily, John made a decision that would alter the course of his life. He decided to establish a foundation dedicated to exposing corruption and supporting whistleblowers. The Keller Truth Foundation would use the substantial evidence they had uncovered as a starting point to continue the fight their parents had begun. Emily, with her years of experience operating in the shadows, became an invaluable partner in this endeavor. Her network of contacts and her ability to navigate complex, dangerous situations complemented John's legal expertise and public persona. The decision to go public with their story was not an easy one. It meant exposing themselves to potential danger and scrutiny. But John and Emily agreed that transparency was the best protection against those who would seek to silence them. In a tell-all interview that shocked the nation, the Keller twins revealed the full extent of their family's involvement in the fight against organized crime and corruption. They spoke of their parents' sacrifices, the years of separation, and their commitment to continuing the mission. The public response was overwhelming. While some criticized them for their parents' actions, many hailed them as heroes. Donations poured into the foundation, and tips about other corruption cases flooded their newly established hotline. John's personal life, however, remained in turmoil. Despite his best efforts, the rift with Sarah proved too great to overcome. They decided to separate, with Sarah needing time and space to come to terms with the new reality. As for the house in Cape Cod, John and Emily made the difficult decision to sell it. However, before doing so, they thoroughly documented everything they found, preserving their family's complex legacy. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Daniel Keller revealed one last secret. Their parents, Robert and Mary Smith, or rather Jason and Sarah Keller, were alive. They had faked their deaths as a last resort when the Costellos got too close. This revelation brought a mix of emotions: joy, anger, relief, and betrayal. John and Emily agreed to meet their parents, but on their own terms. They arranged a secret meeting away from the public eye. The reunion was tearful and tense. Years of separation and secrets had taken their toll, but there was also an undeniable bond. Their parents explained their choices, the impossible decisions they had to make, and expressed their pride in what John and Emily had accomplished. As they parted ways, John realized that forgiveness would be a journey, not a destination. He and Emily had to forge their own path now, guided but not defined by their family's past. With the foundation gaining momentum and new challenges on the horizon, John embraced his new identity, not just as John Keller, but as a man dedicated to uncovering the truth, no matter the cost. The lawyer in him had evolved into something more, a crusader for justice in a world where the lines between right and wrong were often blurred. As he and Emily prepared for their next move, John knew that the road ahead would be difficult. But for the first time in his life, he felt truly aligned with his purpose, his family, and his place in the world. The search for truth had changed everything, but it had also set him free. 5 years after the revelations that shook his world, John Keller stood at the podium, addressing a packed auditorium. The Keller Truth Foundation's annual conference had become a beacon for investigative journalists, whistleblowers, and anti-corruption activists from around the globe. 5 years ago, I thought I knew who I was, John began, his voice steady and confident. I was John Smith, a Boston lawyer with a normal life and a tragic family history. Today, I stand before you as John Keller, and I've learned that family and truth are far more complex and precious than I ever imagined. As he spoke, John's eyes found Emily in the front row. His twin sister, once a stranger, was now his closest confidant and partner in their shared mission. Their bond, forged through shared trauma and purpose, had become the bedrock of his new life. The foundation had exceeded all expectations. Their work had led to the exposure of dozens of corruption cases, the reform of key institutions, and the implementation of stronger whistleblower protection laws. The Keller name, once hidden in shadows, had become synonymous with the pursuit of truth and justice. John's personal life had undergone equally dramatic changes. His marriage to Sarah had ended, but they had found a way to remain friends. The honesty that had torn them apart initially had ultimately allowed for a different kind of relationship built on truth and understanding. In the years since their reunion, John and Emily had maintained a complex relationship with their parents. Regular meetings, sometimes tense, sometimes warm, had slowly rebuilt trust. They would never be a conventional family, but they had found a new equilibrium. The sale of the Cape Cod house had been finalized, but its legacy lived on. A portion of the proceeds had been used to establish a scholarship for students pursuing careers in investigative journalism and anti-corruption law. As John concluded his speech, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. The pain of lost illusions had been replaced by the satisfaction of living an authentic life. His understanding of family had expanded beyond blood ties to include the network of brave individuals who shared his commitment to truth. "Our family secrets set me on this path," John said, "but it's the family we choose and the truths we fight for that define us. Each of you here today is part of that family. Together, we can shine a light on the darkest corners of our world." The applause that followed was thunderous, but for John, the most important response was the quiet nod from Emily. They had taken their parents' legacy and transformed it into something greater than they could have imagined. As he left the stage, John felt a familiar mix of determination and hope. The search for truth that began in a dusty attic had become his life's work. It had cost him the life he thought he knew, but had given him purpose, reunited him with his sister, and allowed him to truly know his parents. Flaws, heroism, and all. John Keller was no longer searching for his identity. He had found it in the pursuit of truth, in the family he had discovered, and in the cause that now defined his life. The journey that began with a hidden safe had led him to a place where he was finally, truly home. As he joined Emily to greet the conference attendees, John realized that while the past had shaped him, it was the future and the truths yet to be uncovered that now called to him. And he was ready to answer that call, with his newfound family by his side.